Hello, good afternoon, happy Friday, ŌNCE Club. I hope you are doing really well and enjoying the sunshine, of course. If you're watching for the first time, this is our third installment of our ŌNCE Club weekly, the Watch series, who is run by our one of our amazing members, Alys McMahon, who is the commercial director at Private Label London, which is a luxury watch and jewelry specialist. They do sourcing and customization. Today we are going to be talking about papers, or if you want to call it luxury watch documentation, authentication, but you typically find that when you're dealing with watch dealers or private sellers, they talk about having papers. And so what Alys is going to do is just describe why documentation is important, or if it's important, and when you need it, how to communicate, how this affects sales and demand with particular clients, and what you can expect with different styles that are popular within the market as well, or brands I should say within the market. Hi Alys.
Hello, thank you for having me on this wonderfully hot day.
It's always a pleasure, always a pleasure.
So as Dominique's mentioned, we'll be covering authenticity documents with the three kind of top brands that we generally talk about in the market. That's Rolex, Audemars Piguet, and Patek Philippe. So I guess the one thing that's important to note with this is that this applies whether you're buying a watch via the secondary market, but it equally applies exactly in the same way if you were a direct client going into these boutiques as well. So whether you're selling direct from boutiques and you've just started working within each of these brands, or either of these brands, or you're obviously delving into the secondary market world with clients, these are important points to note, and they're actually quite good conversational points, which makes the speed of your responses a lot more authoritative, based on the fact that you know what each brand has and their varying components. We'll also just take a very brief look at warranties within each of these brands as well. So having a look at, I think I've just jumped. Let's do Audemars Piguet first. Somewhere. But in any case, it's all PG. So we'll look at Audemars Piguet first. So as you can see, and hopefully if you're viewing this on a mobile device, you should be able to kind of pinch and zoom. But there's just a couple of pictures here to illustrate what each of these brands and their watches come with. So on the left here, we have the box that the Audemars Piguet piece comes in. So this is generally a walnut wooden polished box. It then has the outer cardboard box, which is the box that's on the far left, and then obviously the watch sits within that. Underneath the cardboard outer box is almost like an inset layer, which the booklets and everything sit in. So this actually comes with, specifically for AP, an international warranty booklet, a booklet detailing the movement, as well as how to set the time and how to wind it depending on the watch that you have. So if you bought a self-winding watch, then it will have a booklet pertaining to that movement. Equally, if you've bought a quartz watch, it will also give you a specific quartz movement booklet as well. One thing to note on here, so everything generally comes shrink wrapped, so the booklets will come shrink wrapped. In some cases where you're buying a vintage piece, or you might be buying a pre-owned piece, so something that's been worn and is in a very good mint condition, I should say, so an excellent condition, you may well find that these booklets have been opened. But generally the condition of them you can expect to be pristine and untouched.
Doesn't matter if they're opened or not opened, I mean, in terms of...
It doesn't matter. I mean, I guess if you wanted to be kind of extra cautious, then providing that you've been sold this in the right way, i.e. this is a brand new watch that's, unworn and never been touched or opened or unstickered, or, where there are stickers on the bracelets, for example, to protect the metal, you would always make sure, you would always see that they'd been, you would always expect, I should say, that for them to be wrapped. So, but if they're opened, it's not the end of the world, but it's just how they leave the factories, basically.
Okay.
The card at the bottom is actually something new that AP brought in 2021, so the start of this year, and it has a QR code on it. So there's no other brand doing this right now that I'm aware of anyway, certainly not in the market. And that QR code equally has the detail of the serial number, the warranty number, as well as the description. And it also allows you to be able to just extend your warranty on these pieces. So typically the warranty on AP is 5 years. That's one of the longest in the market. We'll have a look at the others shortly. But actually that card, it's very similar to how Rolex do their cards in the sense that it is a card and it has its serial number and movement number on. The other thing to note here is that the international warranty booklet, which you can actually see on the far right image, and it's the booklet on the far right as well, that also has the serial number and warranty number and description, and then it has a few pages at the back which allow for your servicing details. So as and when you have your AP watch serviced, you bring that booklet, and it will be done by obviously an authorized AP servicer, and they will complete and stamp that information onto the booklet so that always is recorded basically. So that is AP. We'll then look at Patek Philippe. So Patek Philippe, there's a little bit of there's a lot of misinformation in the market around what Patek comes with and the terminology and how to have certain details registered. So Patek generally comes with, if you look in the image in the middle there, hopefully you can see that clearly, it's a lot of information. So it comes equally, the box within a walnut wooden box again, and that then has an outer cloth layer which is branded from Patek Philippe, and it's actually really pretty. It's almost like a watch box polisher, but it basically just protects the box while it's in transit. And then outside of that then also comes a cardboard branded box, which is the cover of which you can see just to the left of the box in that middle image. So Patek will come with the certificate of origin papers. So that's actually the image just on the far left. That has, this watch is this information, by the way, is actually available online. There's nothing on here that's disclosing any sensitive information, but in general, information on certificates of origins are quite sensitive, because what they will have is, along with the movement and movement and model of the watch, as well as the serial number and caliber, they'll also document the place in which it was sold. So Patek, like all brands, like to know their clients, but for Patek they take an additional layer of information from them, and that's their full name and their address details as well, and that is added onto a certificate of origin, which is then issued with each watch. And you would never buy a watch from a boutique without these papers. They would always be issued. There may well be
a direct boutique or even like an approved seller.
Both. So generally a watch, you can find watches without papers on the secondary market. Generally they are a lower value or slightly lower in price, because the certificate of origin does allow watches within the secondary market to command a higher price. What Patek used to do, what they used to do is they used to provide a blank certificate of origin, but now they are not allowing a blank certificate of origin, and that's to prevent the watches being resold. So they really want to try and nail down as much information about you as a client as possible. So if you ever hear a dealer or you hear the terminology within the market, this comes with closed papers, that generally means that the watch will come with papers in this sense, the certificate of origin papers, but it will have somebody's name and address on it, and that can never ever be changed. So with Patek, that's finite, that will always be the case. There are some
of sorry to cut you, in terms of say let's say insurance purposes, or in terms of services, does that affect it, having those closed papers for a new buyer?
No, it doesn't. I mean, if you're buying it via the secondary market, then I would certainly if you're bringing something into service, I would be aware of the providing those papers at the time if you are not the original buyer. And what Patek are doing now in terms of actual boutique purchases, so direct clients that are going in directly to buy, is they're actually not issuing these certificate of origin papers at all for about 12 months. So they'll send you the watch as a client, you can have the watch, but we will retain the certificate of origin, because they don't want that watch, and because of the reseller market having such force, they don't want that watch to go directly from a boutique right the way out to a secondary market at all, but certainly not within the first 12 months.
So making it they're trying to make it difficult essentially for the secondary market to exist,
and the secondary market to these brands is, in some respects disruptive, but what it allows, it allows in most cases, Patek's motto is that you don't ever own a Patek, you merely look after it for the next generation. So there's a lot of gifting that happens in Patek, which is, which kind of, I guess, it aids that feeling that actually, if you have a certificate of origin and it's in somebody else's name and you've been gifted this watch, it doesn't take away value from the watch. But if you were buying a watch via the secondary market and you then happen to take the watch and papers into a Patek to be serviced, you'd definitely be questioned on how you came about buying this, and if it was bought via an authorized dealer and whatever else. Okay. There is actually, on the Patek website, there is actually a change of ownership form that you can fill out. It's very, very simple. It relies on you having the certificate of origin. So if, for example, Dominique, I bought you a Patek for your birthday.
Oh, thank you so much. It's next week.
That's okay. I'll even let you choose the size and model. And my name was on the papers. And then you said, right, well, actually, I want to register the Patek in my own name. You would never be able to register your own details on this certificate of origin, because that's a hard copy paper certificate that comes with the watch. However, you could go onto the Patek website and just re-register yourself with the movement and caliber number, which is obviously only specific to that one individual watch, and add your details, and then Patek would recognize you as the registered owner going forward. Okay. So there is a way, there's certainly a way that Patek are able to track where a watch is at any one point. Not a huge amount of people do that, but it's certainly something that you may wish to recommend to clients who say, well, I really want a Patek in my own name, but I don't want to wait 5 years. I'm happy to buy via the secondary market, but I understand that the certificate can't be changed.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I suppose it's the most important thing is that by having the certificate of origin, it allows you to have the legitimacy in that piece anyway. So, change of ownership or what have you, I suppose, is inconsequential, because at least you always have that original document to provide. And if you wanted to is it possible to, like you said, because gifting is such a huge part, to place the ownership in the recipient as opposed to the buyer? So if I'm, like you said, if I'm buying it for you, could I put it in your name? Or would
that's a question. If you were gifting to a family member or a friend, then certainly, I mean, that link is actually available for anyone. Previously, I've done it on behalf of clients, which it aids the sale in some case, and it adds an additional layer of service. It's not offered in every case, just because Patek are incredibly sensitive in terms of watches being passed around from I say pillar to post in jest, but they are of the three brands that we'll discuss, so AP, Rolex and Patek, there's definitely a lot more sensitivity around Patek as a brand, which is always it's just very good to keep in mind. But absolutely, yeah, anyone who has access to the internet can log onto the Patek website and actually easily change an ownership name, as long as you have the new address of the owner as well as the email address and contact details. It's a data exercise for Patek, right? They'll be capturing that data. But yeah, anyone can do it. I've certainly done it before. If a client specifically asks, I've also done it. But absolutely, it can definitely aid a sale, especially in the cases as mentioned where I've said clients are, they would be more, they would certainly be a lot more interested, and we would definitely convert more sales if you could always have that client's exact name and detail on the original certificate of origin. So this is just a nice way to, you know, offer the service, but obviously not say no. And then, so within the certificate of origin, so everything, the paperwork always comes in a like a leather bound booklet. It also has a booklet detailing the movement and how to set the time. So again, similar to Audemars Piguet. And then that's also depending also on the movement of the watch as well. And then within that leather wallet then sits within, again, the similar setup as AP, but within a small inlet within the cardboard box. So that will be in the kind of the inlet, and then the walnut box will sit on top, and then the cover will just kind of encase the entire thing. Box, I should say, versus just thing. One just important note is the warranty with Patek is 2 years. So just comparing that to AP, which is 5, Patek's is lower. And then another note just on I've actually covered part of that writing, which is I'll reduce that again for when we share it. But Patek also offer extract of the archives, or extract from the archives papers. So this was a service that Patek offered, and up until April of this year, they've now stopped doing it on any orders after, I think it's 1989. So any watch, provided it was 5 years old, you could apply to Patek and say, can you give me the Swiss extract from the archives papers, which is basically a certificate of origin replacement, but they are known as very different things. So you may well see, if you're speaking to dealers, you may well see them list a description of a Patek watch. They might say, you know, Patek Philippe Nautilus 2015, which would obviously pertain to the year, and they may say archive papers, and that's what this means. It means that they don't have the certificate of origin papers. If they don't say anything, then you can make a safe assumption that it comes with a certificate of origin, but certainly check at that point in time, because that will aid the conversation that you'd have with a client in any case. It obviously makes the conversation, in my opinion, slightly more challenging if you want to convert a watch and a client is really keen to have a watch in their own name. Having the extract of the archives gives the piece provenance, but it's one step further away from the certificate of origin, which would already be in somebody else's name. So just think about the challenges that you may have. I've actually only ever sold one watch with extract from the archives papers, because generally they are watches that are a lower value. Again, they lose value slightly more, as mentioned, when you don't have the certificate of origin. So they can be a lower value. They are very, very useful if a client is particularly interested in vintage Patek. So again, it gives the piece provenance, but of course, vintage is a massive, massive world that's actually relatively untapped, because of, you know, damage or parts being swapped out. It's very, very difficult to authenticate a vintage watch without that expertise. So just I guess buyer beware. You know, if you are looking at a piece that has extract archives, ask yourself some questions on the age of the watch, for example, what you know about it already, what you know of the dealer, if you've seen the piece, you know, what your gut feeling is. I certainly wouldn't be flippantly buying a Patek vintage watch from, you know, a dealer who I don't know of or haven't heard of, haven't met, I should say, with extract of archives, because it can be a much more murkier world than most people have experience of.
Got you. So ideally you want a closed certificate of origin paper, but like you said, extract could be helpful with a vintage piece, if you will. And I mean, when you guys talk about vintage, do you you know, what's your kind of take on vintage? Like, for example, with like a lot of ready to wear or leather goods, I usually have the idea of 25 years or more. Is that different watches, or?
Yeah, it's anything. So in watches, it's anything 20 years or more. I mean, look, there are some fantastic pieces that it's a really nice way if somebody is really thinking about, and this taps into a really nice sustainable model where everybody is more interested in than certainly 3 or 5 years ago even. I mean, Dominique, you'll know yourself from even Hermes, vintage Hermes. I know we always talk about Hermes when we're talking about watches, but actually, you know, Hermes kind of lead the way in terms of reseller secondary market, closely followed by sneakers, or sneakers arguably first, then Hermes, and then watches is kind of playing catch up. But the same applies, you know, in terms of people's appetite for vintage and pre-owned or pre-worn is certainly increasing. So you can actually get some fantastic Patek models that, you know, that are fantastic, that are vintage.
I suppose then with, you know, and something that you said, I think in a previous, maybe in the first installment of this series, when we were talking about the appetite for pre-owned or pre-loved, I think these pieces will come down to kind of, you know, if what the client's intentions are, you know, if they're buying sort of with their heart, or is it an investment piece, you know, it will really dictate. And also, so therefore, in terms of what type of paperwork that particular item comes with will may or may not actually be that important, because I suppose if it's an investment, you're much more going to be invested in that. If it's something that you love and you want to have it, then, you know, it's you know, the client might be less bothered by the paper, the trail, or the ownership.
Yeah.
Can you have one more? Can you have more than one ownership change, by the way, on the Patek Philippe?
That's a great question. Technically, yes. There aren't, as far as I know, any limitations on ownership change. I mean, I would definitely approach that with caution. I think, I mean, if you were the one person that sort of discovered how many times a watch has changed hands, I think that would probably then be classed as a vintage piece. I'm not aware, certainly not aware of anybody or any pieces coming across kind of third, fourth, fifth hands that would require that changing. But I mean, it's definitely, I would say that Patek would obviously notice that and try and understand why that piece is changing hands in terms of what they would do in-house if they were to see, you know, they're the ones processing these re-registrations, if you like. So there would definitely come a point, I think, when if you were to see that change hands a few times, then I'm not sure. I mean, you know, in terms of the expectation, maybe every 5 to 10 years you may see something change hands naturally. If you were thinking about the story of Patek and the generational exchange, you know, you're passing it down generation by generation, then I can't see that being an issue. I think if a piece was to be changing, being re-registered via a Patek, via the Patek website every year, I would it's a great question. I would probably not, you know, I'm not sure where it would stand on that. It's something that's definitely I've never come across.
It will be interesting, I think, because like you said, that because watches, this is quite a relatively, as far as secondary market goes, watches in this market is so new. It would be interested, I suppose, in 10 to 15 years now, if there's a place, you know, like it's like buying classic cars, I suppose, or any car. I think there's what you can see how many owners it's had and things like that. And we were, funny enough, we was looking at cars the other day, and I was like, oh, I didn't know you could know that. So it'll be interesting if it'll be like, you know, was kind of like the logbook of watches, right? So
your watch ownership. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things with the certificate of origin. You can certainly see who's owned it before you. You know, and that's, I guess, you know, one thing that is worthwhile kind of noting as well is that, you know, within the certificate of, when you're inquiring as to, you know, into a piece with a dealer or you know, on behalf of a client, it's definitely worthwhile knowing as much information as you can in terms of the previous client who's owned it. And I don't mean personal information, but personal enough to know at least their name and country that they're from. As an example, if you're from, I don't know, a specific country and you're trying to sell a watch to a client, you're trying to sell that watch with those papers to a different client in the same country, then there may well be, as I say, it, you know, there's never been anything to this point that suggests that it couldn't be done. But I think certainly if it was a non-family member that watch was being re-registered to, I would just be aware of that, because, you know, there may be you know, there may be country to country conflict that may actually a client might not want to watch from a certain country, or there's so many different I think there's so many different, if they're particularly warring countries, for example, then that there is also that kind of stigma attached to certain information within the certificate of origin when you're selling.
100%. And I think that's actually a really, really good point, something that could probably get overlooked a lot. For anyone who's unaware, there have been situations where you are dealing within a particular region where countries essentially cease to trade with each other and to acknowledge each other, and you're thinking all I'm dealing in is Chanel and Hermes, and actually you're affected without realizing you're affected. And we've seen that before. In the last 5 years, we've seen that actually with some GCC countries, and it does affect retail, commerce, shipping, and also and sometimes it's attitude. Sometimes it actually there is maybe no actual logistical issues, but it's a preference or a point of view that might be the issue. So that is actually really important to kind of take those things into account, for sure, which is funny. It's actually funny, I think, in general, anytime you're talking about like luxury sales or personal shopping or what have you, you never think that these are the kind of things you have to know, and all of a sudden you're watching the news about politics and what's going on. You realize it affects you. You didn't even know that was going to happen.
It's really funny. You actually think you've dealt with the hard part, and then you get a call from a client that you haven't, because you haven't checked that detail. Now, you may not always be able to get that information from a dealer or a seller, especially if they're not the end client who's not end client, but if they're not the client that has that watch and certificate in their possession, they may be acting as an agent on behalf of you. So in many cases, I get a lot of questions from kind of end clients that say, well, what are the details on the certificate of origin? And you might not be able to get that from a dealer, or there are ways around it for sure, but absolutely, to your point, Dominique, I've had calls from clients who've received something and said, I've got my watch, I love it, the certificate of origin says this country on, or I didn't want anything from this family name, or it can be incredibly contentious and hard to navigate out of without doing that work beforehand. So just be aware of where your client is.
Correspondent affairs, know about it.
Everything. And look, the vast majority of clients don't care, they just want the watch. And again, it taps back into the head or heart purchase, right? They're not buying a watch necessarily because they're not buying it to make money and sell it on in a year's time. They're buying it because they absolutely want that piece. They do not want to wait to buy it in retail. They're prepared to pay a premium for it, and that's what they want.
Absolutely. So Rolex, tell me.
So the last one, which was actually the first, but we've done it flipped on its head today. So Rolex, anything green applies for Rolex. You can safely know that as soon as a green box rocks up, it's a Rolex box. So the picture on the right just details everything that a Rolex watch will come with. So it will be presented in a beautiful green leather box. It will then have a cardboard box over it, which is this Rolex cardboard, off-white cardboard box just to the left of it. And then equally that then fits into a sleeve, which isn't shown here, but it's just another kind of outer sleeve. It's almost just like the travel-in sleeve. That doesn't always get delivered with the watch, but in probably 90% of cases it does. So generally pieces stay together as they move through. If they're bought and sold, most things will stay together. It makes no sense to separate them. But there have been there are definitely kind of there are elements of buying certain watches without certain parts. For example, if you could buy a watch only, for example, which is exactly as you say, it's just the watch only. There's no fuss around the box, certificate, or anything else. And again, if you just want the watch, you'll pay a slightly lower price, but it will allow you to have the watch. So this comes with a guarantee manual, as well as the a leather green authenticity card wallet. So if you look to the left, on the far left picture, you've got the guarantee manual that comes in every single watch, and that's usually just placed into the little leather wallet, which you can see just peeking out from underneath there. Then you'll also receive a book, again, the same as AP and Patek, pertaining to the actual watch movement and or watch style, I should say. And that exactly shows you how to wind it and how to look after it, and just details on the movement. So they will always come. The card in front, so the bottom picture, so this is the Rolex or Authenticity Rolex card, and this gives you the model number as well as the serial number, which is actually blanked out here, and then the date of the purchase. So when a dealer is offering you a watch and says, I've got a Rolex watch, it's a Submariner date, the date is the date is dated 2020, that 2020 date pertains to the date of purchase. Now, the warranty on this is 5 years. So again, the same as AP. So Patek, of the three, Patek are the lowest warranty. Now, a warranty in every sense relates to all of the servicing needs of a watch, should there be a fault with it or a defect in it. Now, Patek, as I say, cover 2 years, and then Rolex and AP both cover 5. If you were to buy a custom watch within this, you know, say if you bought this Rolex Hulk that you can see here, say if you bought it and had it customized, that Rolex warranty is completely null and void, because Rolex would never recognize that as their own piece, because it's essentially been tampered with. But what custom companies will do, and we do it as well, is we will always offer, and custom companies will generally always offer a 2, 5, 6, 7, whichever warranty, you know, the different warranties based on different people, but they'll also offer their own company warranty, which covers any damage or defect within the watch.
So funny enough, because I was actually going to ask about things like warranty and stuff, and you know, if you are buying a watch that has been effectively customized in some way, is it likely that you would still be able to request certain papers authentication with that for the original, or, you know, is it a bit of a moot point anyway because it's since been customized?
So you're saying that if you customize a watch, would you be able to request papers?
What I'm saying is that if I'm looking to buy a particular style of watch, and it so happens that the one that I like, I don't know, has a diamond bezel, so I know that it's customized or what have you. Does it hold any weight to still have a certificate of origin or authenticity in papers because it's actually been customized anyway since then?
It's a fairly moot point, which is what you mentioned a moment ago. Yeah, it's a fairly moot point. I mean, you know, that what you would expect is to understand who customized the watch, and you'd want to be in a position to say, okay, well, where is the warranty with that customization company? Because that's actually, you know, in most cases would be the last place that or the last company or person, I guess, that would have touched that watch. If you took that piece into Patek or Rolex or whatever and said, oh, I've bought this customized watch on, you know, on the internet, I'd like to have it serviced, they likely wouldn't touch it and wouldn't want to touch it, because there's not an association or an affiliation with most customization watch brands that are done outside of those individual brands.
Okay, fair enough. I think that's super interesting. I think it's important to understand what you are getting when you buy these watches, from the retailer, but also from you know, approved dealer or a secondary market dealer, if you will. And in terms of, you know, if you're really, you touched on it before, but if you are buying or selling a watch and it doesn't have any papers at all, I mean, what are the expectations in terms of you know, can we give an example in terms of, you know, how the pricing is different and the availability as well?
Yeah, so typically pieces that come without papers they're actually quite few and far between. It's very unusual. If you were to kind of come across a dealer or you know, an authorized dealer that was selling something without papers, and maybe they were selling everything without papers, I would see that as a bit of a red flag. And I would, you know, a lot of the secondary market is based on trust. So, you know, to become a trusted secondary market dealer is quite something to kind of to behold. You wouldn't last very long if you were trading in watches that, you know, it takes away the provenance. It takes away the provenance of you being able to sell it. There's no reason why. I don't know of any dealer right now that is selling watches without papers. In exceptional circumstances, there may be an incredible watch that is making kind of, you know, making waves in terms of how popular it is, that somebody is selling without papers. But one of the I guess points to understand is you need to fully understand and be happy that you understand that you're buying something without papers. You know, it certainly does have an effect on the price. Clients have asked this as well, in terms of, you know, oh, okay, well, why would I buy this without papers? How can you confirm authenticity? How can you authenticate it? There's two things. First of all, private label itself would always authenticate, you know, a piece in-house in any case, but in most cases we wouldn't necessarily deal with a piece without papers unless we knew who we were buying from, and we would need to know everything about that before we made that decision. What we would also recommend, and how I've sort of worked with this type of inquiry in the past, is I've always suggested that someone like a Sotheby's or a Christie's would also be able to authenticate something. So I'm talking, you know, the 100K plus Patek pieces, for example, that, you know, there are definitely pieces that float around without papers, and that's it definitely has a dramatic effect on the price, but there's not, you know, in terms of the volume, it's not such a voluminous market selling pieces without papers, because that you know, there are so many areas that are unknown. And, you know, yes, if a client loves a piece, they love the piece for itself. However, there is the provenance side of it, which is definitely something which has always been quite consistent over the last 5 years with watches. That, okay, yeah, you know, if you were to look on Chrono24, for example, you definitely see the price fluctuate between a piece that doesn't have papers versus a piece that does have papers.
I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it, that, you know, these small parts can actually have such an effect on a sale. And it's important to know this. And also, it's really important to know, because a lot of clients might not have that understanding. Like you said, they might have been coming from a place of wanting to purchase it via a boutique, but like you said, don't want to wait 5 years, and so they are coming in a little bit new. So they need to also understand, if, like you said, if they are, depending on the type of purchase they're making, head or heart, you know, you have to be forthcoming with this information before they buy. Because if the idea is that they're trying to do an investment but they don't buy it with papers, that will affect what they could, you know, potentially sell it for if they can. So I think transparency in terms of, you know, what having this, you know, these authentication papers,
but equally
important.
Sorry, I just cut over you there. Equally, even if you're presenting a watch, you go and deliver a watch to a client and you're presenting it in the same way that you may do something else, a gown or a bag or something, you have to be aware of what these pieces come with, so that you can explain them and just say, this has this with it. And again, it's another affirmation of the purchase. Okay, here, you know, here is the guarantee manual. This is the card. Keep that safe. You know, I think that one of the first watches that I sold was missing something from one of these, and it was an AP watch, and it was missing. I can't think what it was missing now, but it was missing something that, had I not have understood what should have been there, I would have shipped this out to a client, and it would have been, you know, it could be catastrophic. You know, a lot of these pieces that, if you are sending them to a client and they say, oh, it hasn't got this with it, or, you know, with certain Patek pieces, it can sometimes come with the little the name escapes. It's like a little pin that comes with certain perpetual watches, and sometimes that's not in the box. Now, it's not in the box because it's generally kept safe, because it's a metal part and it's kept away from the watch to avoid scratching, but sometimes they can be very easily sent without that. So if you send that to a client who has a perpetual watch, who needs that for the watch to function, and they're coming to you to say it's missing before you knew that that it was missing before you shipped it, you're then again having to try and repair that part of the relationship. And in most cases, it's never detrimental, but it may have, you know, your client may question buying another watch with you if there are certain little things missing that you haven't picked up on beforehand because you didn't know about it.
And also, I suppose with those kind of examples, it just makes the service super clunky, because then you have to, and also like everything's now in retrospect, so then you have to go back and be like, well, we don't have it, and then there's proof of that you didn't have it in the first place, and then that seller has to then go back and find it, and then, you know, it's a lot of verifying, and it just ends up it can, yeah, like you said, it could affect a future sale just because it's now a bit clunky and a bit finicky, when actually, you know, what you essentially want to be able to provide for your client is, you know, the next best thing to a boutique experience.
Absolutely.
Directly, I guess. Well, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much. If there are any questions that our members or viewers have watched with regards to this particular subject, or anything with regards to luxury watches, Alys is on the ŌNCE Club platform. You can also find them on Instagram, which I believe is Private Label London.
Yep.
And so you can DM them there or find them on their website, because I think it's really important that, you know, when you're dealing with luxury watches, you're dealing with very high value items, and therefore the expectation of a client and how they're dealt with is absolutely much higher. So the most amount of information that you can have before you go ahead with communicating with a sale, I think you should have it. So I definitely think you need to get in touch with these guys or work with Private Label, just so you can have some confidence and security in terms of what you're doing going forward. So I would definitely implore you to get in touch with Alys directly if you have any questions.
Thank you.
That's okay. Well, I'm wishing everyone a really amazing weekend. I hope that the weather holds out a little bit longer so we can enjoy a nice Saturday, Sunday, and I will see you next week. But thank you, Alys. I'll see you in 4 weeks, I suppose.
Thanks. Everyone.
Bye.
See you next time. Bye.